the Liberal government has launched a series of attacks on freedom of expression. Currently, through his so-called digital charter, Trudeau is pressuring social media companies, which, by the way, already censor speech that doesn't align with a left-leaning worldview. He's getting them to become even more biased toward conservative opinions and values. He's threatened to impose fines on Twitter, Facebook, and others if they don't begin censoring hateful content on their platforms. But the irony is, hateful content, as defined by Trudeau and his government, often looks exactly like factual content that just happens to embarrass or offend liberals. Now here's another attack. Just last week we learned that the Trudeau government is taking steps to bring back Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. And now if you don't remember, that provision was rejected about 6 years ago because it said that speech could be censored if it was likely to expose a group to hate. But the courts found that the criteria of likely to expose was so vague and broad that it allowed any group that was offended by a joke or even factual criticism to launch a complaint. So it was removed. And now the Liberals, in their desire to control the speech of Canadians, want to bring it back. But in terms of outright censorship, one of the most well-known and controversial things the Liberals did was to push for restricting Canadians' right to criticize Islam. In March of 2017, the Liberals adopted M-103, a motion that was sold to Canadians as a way to condemn all religious discrimination, which would have been a great thing. But then it only specifically mentioned one religion, Islam. Even more troubling, the motion called on the government to condemn Islamophobia, but it didn't define what Islamophobia was. Concerned commentators, and I was among them, pointed out that if the term was not clearly defined, any fair and factual criticism of Islamic doctrine or practice could become the target of censorship. And this wasn't far-fetched. Some major Muslim lobby groups had already argued that even if dislikable comments were directed toward Islamic politics or culture, that should qualify as Islamophobia. In an essay that I wrote for the Vancouver Sun about the issue, I showed that the Liberals were making things worse by trying to restrict speech involving Islam. Here's some of what I wrote. Whatever is motivating the Liberals or others of like mind to shut down critique of Islam, such thinking is misleading and misplaced. It's misleading because it conflates criticism and discrimination. But criticism is not discrimination. It's misplaced because religion is at its best when it is subjected to constant and fervent critique. Criticism leads to necessary correction. Exposure to criticism can make a religion better, but sheltering it from critique through censorship makes it worse. Censorship is an acid, not a glue, when it comes to progress and social cohesion in Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, the acid of censorship and intolerance has increased under Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, and it's eroding and corroding our society. As you know, the title of my speech is "Your Government has Turned Against You, Now What?" Indeed, now what? Well, I can tell you what the solution is not. The solution is not to kick out Trudeau and his Liberals and replace them with Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives. If you follow current events, you'll have seen that Andrew Scheer has repeatedly insisted that he will not fight for the free expression rights of Canadians holding conservative values. And just like Trudeau, he's actually trampled the right to freedom of conscience for those whose moral conviction leans pro-life. He specifically banned all of his candidates, if they lean pro-life, from saying anything public about their beliefs. As well, just like Trudeau, Scheer has made moves to silence those who want to offer fair and factual criticism of Islam. Just this month, Scheer refused to allow Professor Salim Mansour from running as a Conservative candidate in the City of London, Ontario. Salim is a practicing Muslim, and he's a world-renowned political scientist from Western University. He's researched and published on the threats of radical Islam, and Andrew Scheer won't let him speak. Radical Islam is a serious problem in the West. As a sociologist of religion, I read the reports, even if the media tries to ignore them. But we've now arrived at a moment where a national leader, Andrew Scheer, is so intimidated by political correctness that he won't defend a candidate who speaks objective truth about a known threat to our national security. And finally, just last week, Scheer removed his own MP, Michael Cooper, from a parliamentary justice committee. Why? Because Cooper dared to defend conservative values. Here are the details. A witness who was speaking before the Justice Committee made the outrageous claim that the man who had gunned down Muslims at a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, was inspired by conservative values. Cooper was shocked, and he used the writings of the shooter himself to factually refute that claim. Using direct quotes, he showed that it was actually Marxist communist ideology that inspired the killer, not conservative ideas. Well, Scheer ignored that Cooper was correct and instead condemned him for quoting the words of a killer, which Scheer said should be completely censored. And it gets worse. Scheer then made Cooper apologize to the witness, the guy who had maligned conservative values. And then, Scheer gave full support to the Liberals and the NDP, who had demanded that Cooper's words be literally expunged from the official record of Parliament. This is just like in the novel 1984. The entire event was censored out of existence with the blessing of Andrew Scheer. Now, in case I've been too subtle, let me clear things up for you. Andrew Scheer has repeatedly shown he will not stand up for the conservative insiders inside his party. Do you really think that he has any intention of standing up for average Canadians who hold conservative views and values? But let me finish with a message of hope. There is one party, the People's Party, and one national leader, Max Bernier, that will fight for the freedom of conscience and freedom of expression for all Canadians.